Estamos de volta na sala de autores e lançamentos. Teremos agora uma participação internacional. Stefanie Johnson, ela que é professora, palestrante de destaque, ela já recebeu inúmeras bolsas do governo americano para estudar liderança e criar programas de desenvolvimento de líderes. Lança de forma inédita no Brasil, aqui no Flipoços 2020, o livro Inclusifique, como a inclusão e a diversidade podem trazer para a inovação para sua empresa. O livro compartilha as maneiras surpreendentes como os líderes minam a inclusão e fornece maneiras viáveis que podem articular para construir equipes mais inclusivas. Um oferecimento da Bem-Virá e Saraiva Educação. Lembrando de que é uma palestra gravada. Vamos lá.
Good evening, friends from Brazil and Flipoços 2020, Poucas Décadas International Literacy Festival in this virtual version. Thank you for being here and for the launch of my first book in Brazil by editorial Bem-Virá, with the title Inclusify, The Power of Uniqueness and Belonging to Build Innovative Teams. I thought I would answer a few questions about the book, starting with why I wrote a book about inclusion and diversity. And the answer is really simple. I was studying diversity as part of my research. I studied the intersection of leadership and diversity. So what leaders can do to create greater diversity, and found that that was really only half the battle, that there was still a gap in the outcomes of diversity when people didn't feel included. And so I thought this is something we need to know about. What does it even mean to feel included and how do you make it happen? And so that was really the reason, along with the fact that we know diversity and inclusion drives tremendous outcomes in organizations, from innovation to performance and decision-making, all the way down to stock prices. How to identify unconscious prejudice in leadership of a company? You know, I really look for what people are doing rather than what they're saying. It's really easy to say, you know, we value diversity, you can put it in your core values, but what are you actually doing? What does the diversity of your company really look like? Are you setting goals for diversity and inclusion? Are you setting up programs for gender equity or whatever it might be? And I really look at those actions rather than the words, because the words are so easy to say. What is it? What is Inclusify, and is it possible to become an inclusifier? Inclusifying is the leadership style that I identify, where leaders recognize the importance of both belonging, which is feeling accepted and valued, but also uniqueness. So recognizing that each of us bring with us to work a unique identity, and the goal for leaders isn't to make everyone the same, but it's to recognize people's unique identity and make sure that they're valued, not in spite of that identity, but because of that identity, that you see them and that they can be themselves while at work. So that's what an inclusifier is. And it's possible for any of us to become an inclusifier. In fact, I take the position that inclusion, being an inclusive leader, isn't actually natural. For everyone, it's a journey. It's a journey of first understanding your unconscious biases, and those become conscious biases, and then starting to take actions to really consciously include other people. And the good news is, if you do that for a while, it starts to become unconscious and just a natural way of being. But for any of us, it's definitely a journey. The best way to promote inclusion in companies. Well, there's tons and tons of ways, but maybe I'll give you my favorite 3 ways to promote inclusion. The first one is how you hire people, and trying to expand your networks, reach people who aren't normally a part of your social network or work network, and then maybe hire people who aren't your typical employee. I call it going for rogues, but trying to bring in that difference. And that will actually maybe add a little bit of diversity. And then the next couple steps are, how do you make that new diverse talent feel included? And I think what I found in doing the research for the book is one of the times where people feel the least included is when they're sitting in meetings. And so you can be doing a great job in your office, or maybe today it's in your home office, but it's when you get into those meetings with your colleagues that you start to realize when you're not really one of the group. And so for that, I would say really redesign meetings to make sure that everyone feels a part of the meeting, that they're contributing equally, that their contributions are valued, and so they feel included when they're in the meeting. The third thing I would say is getting to know people just on a really individual level as a leader. We all are naturally inclined to get to know people who are more similar to ourselves. And so maybe it takes a little bit of effort or planning to really exhibit empathy and understanding and get to know the rest of your team members on a personal level. The next question is, in the book, Inclusify, you talk about the archetypes of leaders. What are these archetypes and how do they stop practicing diversity and belonging in companies? So the archetypes of leaders are essentially leaders who fully embrace both the uniqueness and the belonging. Those are the leaders I call inclusifiers. If you do neither of those things, then I call that a meritocracy manager. Most often it's the leader who just says, I just want to hire the best person for the job. I don't care about your individual identity. I don't care about creating a strong culture. I just want the highest performer. And that obviously doesn't make people feel like they belong, but it also doesn't allow them to be seen for their unique selves. You can also be a leader who does a really good job at belonging, like everyone feels like a really cohesive team, as long as you look and act like the rest of the team. Those leaders I call culture crusaders, and they do a really good job at building belonging, but that belonging is not equal for everyone. And so some people's unique identities are left at home. They don't feel like they can be themselves at work. And then people who are leaving that part of themselves at home actually don't really feel like they belong, because they only belong if they're kind of changing or faking who they are. There were also kind of a surprise in my research. I found leaders who were big champions for diversity. They were really investing in it and focusing on that uniqueness. Like, I really care about championing women or people of color, LGBTQ+. And sometimes, even though those leaders did a good job at pointing out the uniqueness, they didn't do a good job of bringing everyone together as a cohesive team. And those leaders I called white knights. And they were essentially high on uniqueness, but low on belonging, because focusing on that person's difference as their main characteristic made them feel like they weren't part of the group. And I certainly recognize this is a fine line to walk. You want to understand that people bring different identities and value people for those unique identities. But at the same time, you don't want to make that the only thing that you see about them. People want to be valued for the work that they're doing and the contributions they're making. There were some leaders who kind of did both, uniqueness and belonging, but didn't fully commit. Those leaders I called optimists, and they are closest on the journey to becoming inclusifiers. They just need to take a few concrete steps, like setting goals, measuring change, and just really being vocal about their commitment to diversity and inclusion. In the book Inclusify, I talk about behaviors to reinforce uniqueness and belonging. What are those behaviors? There's so many. So I talked about setting up meetings in a way to bring out difference, the setting up cultural activities for people to bond and relate, and making sure that those fun bonding activities are actually inclusive to everyone. So let's look for, what do we normally do for fun? Like maybe we have a happy hour, or we do something, we go golfing or something like that, and really thinking deeply about who attends and who doesn't attend, and maybe even are there ways that we can just slightly change those events so that more people could feel involved. Like, rather than happy hour, which not everyone drinks, or not everyone wants to go out after work, you could do a coffee hour in the middle of the day. Or rather than taking everyone out golfing, maybe you could do a golf lesson, which is more inclusive of maybe people who don't have that experience golfing. And so trying to make those bonding activities, like, they're so important, especially right now, to build belonging, as many of us are working remotely. And then just being a little more thoughtful about how to build belonging in a way that's inclusive. And I would say the same thing for like celebrating different cultural activities. You want to make sure that everyone's culture is celebrated and not just like the dominant culture. Leave finally a message about my book for Brazilians in particular. You know, I don't know, like I have only been to Brazil one time, and I would say in my very limited experience, so I understand if this is not, or if this is like stereotypical, but I found it just to be the most warm, inviting, and a place that really values belonging. Like, you know, in my experience, family is really important. We sat and had many, many long dinners. And I think this is actually great because it creates a real opportunity for that belonging feeling, because this is, I think, is very natural for Brazilians to have that connection. I think I talk about this in the book, but culturally I am Mexican. I know obviously culture in Mexico is very different from Brazil, but similarly, there's a very strong like belonging and connection. And I think that means that maybe Brazilians are already farther ahead in becoming inclusifiers, because that belonging piece and connection with others might come more naturally. And so maybe the new, like what does this book add that's new or different, is that uniqueness element, and recognizing that even though you're doing a great job of bringing people together, maybe some people are left out if they don't fit in the norm, and you can find ways to actually support their uniqueness as well. Thank you so much for letting me talk with you. I hope you read the book. I hope you love it. Please reach out. My website is drstefjohnson.com, drstefjohnson.com. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn or any other social media platform you use at Dr. Steph Johnson.
Agradecemos a participação internacional de Stefanie Johnson, em parceria com a Bem Virá. O Flipoços 2020, edição virtual, é uma realização da GSC Eventos Especiais em parceria com a NUB. Agradecemos aos nossos patrocinadores, BDMG Cultural e Editora Sextante, a parceria cultural do Sesc Minas e Senac Minas, ao apoio cultural da TEG Experiências Literárias, EPTV Sul de Minas e Móveis Trevisan. Agradecemos as editoras e expositores. Aproveite para visitar a nossa feira virtual. Nossos expositores estão com promoções especiais para o evento. E convido a todos a acompanhar a nossa programação amanhã, dia 12 de novembro, a partir das 9h30. Teremos grandes nomes como Lúcia Teixeira, Márcia Paganini, Vanessa Raton, Maria Silvia Orlovas, Renato Nogueira, Tom Farias, Rovani Ferreira, Sérgio Saleitão, Marcos Montenegro, Arnaldo Bloch e Alexandre Comino. Tenham todos uma boa noite e até lá!